Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Sisters Interview. I am a Shaxi. It's my sister, Sir Rifkin, and our guest tonight is Viscountess Gwenillian. She's a member of the Order of the Chivalry, a Pelican from the East Kingdom. And did you say something?
Hi. No, I accidentally hadn't had my phone muted yet. I apologize.
What was that? Welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you. It's wonderful. I'm just amazed at how many interviews you ladies have done. And it's great that you're doing these.
My new thing to say is this is the most involved in the SCA I've been in a long time.
There is a lot of truth in that, actually.
I hear you. I hear you. I've certainly done a lot of meetings and stuff face to face that I wouldn't be doing if I was going to events.
Right. It's so funny. Anyway, welcome. We usually start people off with your SCA origin story. How did you find the SCA and what made you fall in love with it?
Well, a long time ago is how I like to start. In 1977, I went to college in Vermont, University of Vermont, and my uncle was a professor there and lived 5-6 miles from the college. And so it was arranged that I would live with them the first year. And my cousin had found the SCA when she was in college, somewhere in New York. I want to say it was Buffalo, but that may be wrong. So my mother was a medieval English major in college, and I grew up going to the Shakespeare on the Green plays that they did at UVM. So my cousin said to me, "Oh, you'll like this. We have a medieval club and you should join." And it turned out there were 2 of them and they needed the 3rd member to become a shire. And I was known for my loud voice. So they said, "Oh, good, you can be the herald and join us." So I got my membership and didn't really know what I was doing and signed up, and we became the Shire of Mountain Freehold in Vermont. And I was the herald. And my SCA membership number is 4 digits long, 1762. So yeah, I've really been in it that long.
Wow.
So the fun part is the next year, her brother, who's now Tierlock, a master at arms, they had gone to an event and seen fighting. So him and his roommate choreographed this silly fighting demo that we did. And I was there hollering and yelling and being a herald. And I saw what they were doing. I thought, wow, that looks like fun. And so he gave me the sword and he held up his shield and he said, "Well, here." And I'm like, "Cool." So I whacked away at the shield for a while. And then he said, "You can hit me, you know." And I'll never forget that feeling of, oh my God, I can. And that was the birth of that. I was in armor by that fall. So I started fighting in 1978. And I did take a break from fighting to have my knees replaced. But other than that, I've pretty much been fighting far too long.
That's amazing.
And just grew in love with it from that moment on. I mean, I've been able to move around and live in other kingdoms, and I have to honestly say I've never gotten tired of the SCA because there's just so many aspects of it. You can do whatever you want, and if you get tired of one thing, well, go do something else. It's just, it is definitely a passion.
So
for a lot of years.
When you started fighting, were you a sword and shield fighter, or were you into some other kind of weapon form?
I was primarily sword and shield. Now, this was in the days that we did not have huge shields. The convention for a shield was the width of shoulder to shoulder and the length of chin to crotch. So I have a heater shield, which is shoulder to shoulder and chin to crotch. It really is that old. I think I may have replaced the wood ones.
Mine is still like that because that's still our convention out here.
Yeah. And I we did melees. And, you know, it was interesting because there were no, I mean, maybe 3 women fighters. They were very, very far and few in the East. The East was huge. And so at the time, I took up the shield, and I was basically standing in melees with 2 fighters behind me with their pole arms. And one of those fighters was my cousin Tierlock, who went on to become a master at arms. And the other fighter, a couple years later, was Randall of the Dark, who went on to become a duke and a master at arms, and a just delightful friend. And so I was essentially their shield. So wherever we'd go and wherever there was a melee, it's like, okay, Gwen, you know, line up. And I knew how to defend myself. I couldn't kill anything. I just let them kill everything. So I was the shield wall for Mountain Freehold for many years.
Did you prefer melee or tournament fighting?
In the beginning, I definitely preferred melee. That was, it's what I grew up doing. It was where my passion was. Again, there just weren't that many women in armor. And so, you know, the point of tournaments was to go on to win the crown tourney. And, you know, at that point, it's like, yeah, right, that's never going to happen. And so the passion of the East has always been melee. And even back then, we were melee junkies. So we used to go to events, and even in the winter, the event would be held at some church or something, would all crash at people's apartments and houses. And the next day we'd have these fighter practices, and there could be 50 people there. And we'd just break into melee units and fight all day Sunday, and then all go home at dark and go to our jobs on Monday. It really was the thing we did. And that's, yeah, it was quite a few years that I just did melees.
And you continue to be the shield person in the melees. Did you ever pick up a spear or a great weapon or anything?
Nope.
Me either.
Nope. As a matter of fact, at my first Penzic I went to, it was one of the first times they did a pass battle. And so there I am being the shield wall, and I'm always on the left end because I'm a lefty. So I just remember it going on forever, and I'm the shield wall, and people are coming and going, and, you know, there's this mob of fighters ahead of me and in front of me. And so I'm just defending for all I'm worth while the spears and pole guys behind me do the killing. And so I don't know how long it was. It felt forever, but suddenly the people in front of me, the bad guys, I hear them say, "Go get Sir so-and-so." And someone would move up to the line, and they'd go, "That one with the blue and white shield," which was me. And so they'd try and take me out. And then after a few minutes, "Go get Duke so-and-so." And so up would come an even bigger guy with his polearm, "That one with the blue and white shield." Well, by the time they overran the pass, I was the last shield person alive. And I was on my knees. I couldn't feel a thing from the waist down. I'd been on my knees so long. Oh. And they break through, and I'm like, oh, thank God I don't have to fight anymore. Well, 4 of them stand there in front of me. And I'm like, what? And they're like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, really? So these 4 guys who are at this point, I don't even know what their level, they're all shiver and bub, are having fun with me. And finally one guy comes around and pokes me in the side. I literally didn't feel him, and I hear him say, "Hello, I'm over here." And I look over and I look down, and I'm like, oh, thank God. And I crawl off. I'm like, why couldn't you guys just leave me there? I was so, it was hysterical. I mean, people were talking about it a lot, and I was just sitting there going, I'm just staying alive for the guys behind me. But that was probably one of my most exciting, fun events that I went to, and played shield wall with my little heater.
During this time, did you have a mentor in fighting that was like your main teacher and support, or did you have a group of people?
It was kind of a group. Tierlock and Randall were in my own local group, and they definitely were polearm junkies. And Randall went on to be an incredible spearman and sword and board. But the real mentor, and he was really the mentor for all of Mountain Freehold. We were so far north, no one ever came to see us. We didn't have a king until someone in the next state over actually won and came to us. But there was a guy that was from New Jersey, and he'd come up, and it was Farrell von Hallstern, who went on to become Master at Arms. He had become Siegfried von Hallstern's squire, and he would come up to the northern region, which included Mountain Freehold, the group in New Hampshire, which was changed names a couple times, and Revathud was the shire when I was around for a long time. And he had just, you know, there were all these hot guys fighting that didn't really have a purpose or a place, and they were all melee junkies, and he had round us up and formed us into the Northern Region Army. And these are the people that we'd have these fighter practices on Sunday afternoons, you know, after the event. And he'd show up Penzic, and they'd be like, well, is there any fighters from the north here? Oh yeah, we've got a bunch, you know, we've got 150 slathering idiots who are from the north. And he definitely became my mentor, because at those practices, he was often on the other side. And as I say, I was always on the left end. And the lay-on would happen, and he'd move to my side of the battle. So he was always after me. And, you know, I didn't know what I didn't know. So he'd kill me, but he'd always have to do something different to kill me. And without me knowing it, he was teaching me. And when I did finally want to learn how to kill something and actually use my sword, he was probably, him and Randall were the two that really helped me and encouraged me. And Farrell was an interesting guy. He wasn't a very big guy. And he fought really boxer style. That was his whole thing, was he watched box. He loved boxing, and he watched boxers. And so he'd try his best and, you know, to show me, we'll try this, try that. But the thing really back then is nobody really knew how to teach. Paula Bellatrix had come east, and there was a video that was made and got copied so many times no one could see it anymore. And they tried, but especially with female fighters at that point in the early 80s, there may have been 4 or 5 of us, and 2 or 3 of those were, one woman was downright nuts. I mean, she really was kind of crazy. And the others would get in armor because their boyfriend fought. So there were maybe 2 of us that were serious about it, and they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to teach us. We just figured it out or not. But I have to say, I was never discouraged from fighting. You know, they'd sit there and look at me and scratch their heads, but they'd fight me. And I never, ever felt the problem of a woman fighter shouldn't be out there fighting. Not in the early days, not in the East.
But you ran into it later?
Yes, I ran into it in Drachenwald, actually. And that was an interesting transition. So when I finally did say, you know, I really want to learn how to kill somebody, and so I started trying to enter tournaments, you know, I could defend myself all day, and the guys would get frustrated. I could tell they were frustrated because they couldn't kill me, but I couldn't kill them either. I'll never forget one of my first times I killed somebody in a list. You know, they fall down and die, and they get up, and their comment was, "You fight pretty good for a chick." It wasn't said to be mean. That was how we talked, and that was how it was. And it was like, oh, that was to me like, oh, cool. You know, first of all, he fell down, he took my blow, and second of all, he complimented me. You know, so the struggle for me was actually learning what to do with the sword and how to kill. And I did have encouragement. I think by then I had been around long enough, and I had earned enough respect as a shield person that people knew I belonged in armor, and I really was trying to learn how to fight and trying to do it. I struggled. Again, it wasn't from lack of support. It was more lack of just knowing how to teach and knowing what to teach. The best fighters would try to teach, but it's just like any athlete. The ones that are naturals, they don't know what they're doing. And they try and explain what they're doing, but they honestly don't know. So some of the best fighters really couldn't tell you how to fight. They couldn't figure out what to help you. So I'd just keep fighting and tried. And then I had the opportunity to go to Drachenwald. And that was where in my own head, it was like, okay, I'm going to go to this principality. I knew a little bit about it. I said, I really need to figure out how to fight while I'm there. It's a smaller group of people. Hopefully I'll find somebody, some other teachers. And I did, luckily. So it worked out well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you end up squaring to somebody?
I did. I actually squired to someone. First of all, I'm going to back up just a second. Drachenwald was a very, very interesting place. So this was 1985. So I'd been in the SCA 8 years, fighting for 7 at this point. And when I went there, there was one active chivalry, Ramy Hindle, who is now in it. And I think he's actually in Trimaris now. He wasn't from Atlantia originally. And, he other knights had come and gone. Most of Drachenwald was military. So, they were there 3 years and then they disappeared. So it was a lot of military. So when I got there, I kind of knew he was in the military, but he had been there longer than anyone. And he was kind of the staple premier knight of the principality. So just after I got there, I got there in the late summer, the next spring, this knight shows up who's a new knight, but from the West Kingdom. And he had worked with Duke Paula Bellatrix, but also Duke Radnor. He was actually Duke Radnor's squire before he was knighted. And he was in the area of Germany nearer to me and ended up squiring me, which at the time, I had no real plans to do that, but it kind of came to being and it made sense. And he definitely knew how to teach. And I knew I could get what I needed from him. So it turned out to be a good thing. And Rame certainly, when I was in Drachenwald, also mentored me quite a bit. He is a very good guy. And he had been prince a couple times. And the person who I was knighted to, Artemis, ended up always in the field during coronation. So he never even had a chance. He could have easily won. They were small coronations back then. But he just was always in the field. So I was able to fight.
And did your fighting turn a corner when you got squired? Like the offense part build up?
Yeah, and it was interesting because one of the things I did when I went there is I presented myself. The prince, the man who was prince when I went there, when I got there, was an unbelted prince, which they had a lot of out there. And so the first event that was actually a fighting event, I showed up and I said, hello, I'm from the East and I understand we need to authorize when we, come here because you've got people from all over. And they're like, well, if you're from the East, this is an Eastern principality. I said, no, I will. So I actually fought him and he was Rame's squire. And we pretty much traded kills, which at that point for me was doing well. I had picked up enough to, again, my defense was better than my offense. And so the interest was there right away because they said, oh, she's got potential. She can goes far. So I had a lot of people really encouraging me and teaching me, and it definitely turned a corner. I got hungry. I really felt like this is what I want to do. And this is now, I see the way through it. And within a year, not even 8 months, I was like, I really want to win a coronet tourney. I can do this. I could, scope out enough of who my other opponents were. And I was getting good enough to that point I think too, because the Principality, there were no wars, there were no melees. It was all single combat, whereas the East Kingdom was all melee. So that, just that in itself really helped. I was never pulled from, well, I have to go join the melee versus do a practice. Everything was single combat there. And that definitely focused me and helped me get out of my bubble of defense. I also changed my shield. I went with a round shield. So I found if the bigger shield, I just couldn't find the offense around it. It was always in the way. So within a year of being there, my shield went from like a 24-inch shield down to an 18-inch round shield. And that was pretty much what I ended up using most of the time. And two sword. I found two sword out there, and I absolutely fell in love with two sword. And I did a lot of two sword when I was in Drakenwald. That was a blast.
When you decided that you were going to go for cornet, how did your training change? And what did you do to train?
I fought everybody. And that was probably where I developed my so I have never gone to a gym. I don't work out. I've never done anything like that. I'm always was fairly fit. I grew up riding horses. I didn't have horses in Germany. I was a civilian. I was not in the military, so I didn't have all that at my, beck and call. I worked Monday through Friday at a hospital. I was a physical therapist. And then on the weekends I was free. So on the weekends it was get in armor and fight all day and fight everybody I can fight and fight them some more. And I learned at that point that when I learned the most was when I was so tired I couldn't think anymore. And that was where I developed, when you're too tired to fight, fight more. It's something I teach. It's something I still do. When you don't think you can swing the sword, fight one more fight, because it turns off your brain and allows you to do the things you've been training without putting the mental piece on top of it. And that was huge. When I kind of understood that it was my thinking process that was getting in the way of me just fighting, and I had to learn how to turn that off. That was a big development. And where it came to pass, I was in this ridiculous tourney. They were doing 2 out of 3 every bout.
Oh, wow.
Rame and it was one of the few tourneys that Artemis was at my night. Him and Rame are standing on the side of the field, and I'm fighting this guy that I really could have handled quite easily. I could not kill him. I was overthinking. I could not kill him. I was so frustrated. I finally legged him, and it went on this way. He killed me the first fight. I killed him the second fight. But I mean, they went on forever. So we're in the third fight. I finally legged him, and I remember to this moment the feeling of, oh my God, I wish he would just go away. And evidently in that moment, I threw the killing shot, because my brain had disengaged and finally let my physical ability. I don't remember throwing the shot. I just remember thinking, oh God, I wish this guy would just go away. And he fell down. And I'm like, how did that happen? And I come off the field, and Rame and Artos are just laughing their heads off, which is not helping anything. But that was the moment. It was like, oh, I really need to stop thinking. I really need to just turn off the brain and just fight. And it was a huge turnaround. It was that first year, it would have been 1986 at that point. And it was that fall that I fought my first cornet tourney.
How did you figure out how to do that at will? Because I think that is a hard thing for people to do.
I don't know that I can do it at will.
Okay. It's a progression.
It is definitely something that you have to train to do that. We spend too much at practices, training, and thinking, I want to throw this shot, I want to learn this shot, I want to go kill that guy, and we don't just fight. So there were a couple things I did I would do to try and in my own head trigger that. And one of the things became quite a tradition to me. That I would do at every cornet, crown tourney, whatever I was fighting in that was an upper level tourney. I would always, the minute I was called onto the list field, before I stepped onto that list field, no matter whether they were there or not, I would salute the queen. And I would actually do a salute, whether she was there or not. I would salute the queen. And by doing that, it became a habit that just simply told me, turn it off. Just turn it off. This is now, you're here to do this thing. Turn off the brain. And that became an important tool that I used out west when I was still an unbelt and really gearing towards the chivalry. In Drachenwald, where it started from that moment on was I just had to have fun. I just had to let the fighting be fun because it was still fun for me. And I was an upper level fighter at Drachenwald. There was, you know, with people coming and going, there were a lot of people that just couldn't train regularly. There were a few knights by then that had come in and they were good fights, you know, don't get me wrong, but I could still trade kills with them. And so it really became a matter of just go out and enjoy the fight, and that will turn off the brain. And that was what I used more in Drachenwald. It was interesting because the first coronet tourney I fought in, I'm going to back up a minute. I had seen the person I knew I was going to fight for, who I wanted to make prince as my consort. The very first event I went to, which was their Yule, that first fall. He was non-fighter, talented musician. Oh my God, he'd have his electric keyboard and he'd just be doodling away with these Baroque things and just making them up and having a blast. Stefan. And that first year I had met him and known him, and he was a captain in the Air Force. And I'm like, oh, God, I can never ask him. So the first fall, I actually fought for my squire brother. And we both fought in the tournament. And then the next year, it was like, I really want to fight for Stefan. I really need to ask him to fight. And I literally waited until it was almost too late. And I called him up and asked him. And he was honored. I was so afraid he was going to say no. Don't ask me why. And he was absolutely thrilled and honored. And so he became my consort from then on. And we ended up, I fought in 3. It should have been only 2, but it was 3 coronets for him and made him my prince. And he was just the perfect consort. He was, in my mind, everything that I wanted in a consort, you know, not having a fighter. Later on, it didn't matter to me, but for that one, it mattered that I had a non-fighter consort. But that was where I finally, I'd heard about the anti-female fighter thought, and that there were people that believed that, and it was there that I ran into it. So what should have been only having to fight in 2 more coronets, I had to fight in 3, was because they had to refight a coronet, because of some really crappy stuff that went on, which all came about that.
Well, I'm hoping that you'll tell your story.
Yeah.
I think it's super interesting. So if you want to tell your coronet story, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
You know, again, coming from the East Kingdom, that I never had an anti-female fighter. Never. I mean, they didn't know what to do with me, but they were always supportive, and they never thought you shouldn't be here. There were some guys in the East that wouldn't fight me, but I think it was as much they didn't know what, or they couldn't hit a woman or something like that, but it was never negative. So when I got to Drachenwald, everything was really positive. The people that were active and involved saw me as someone that they, with potential, who could cheat, they could teach, and it was all very positive. So that spring coronet that I fought in, there was a fighter who came out of Berlin. So he wasn't very active because it was really hard to get across the Berlin border, because you had to go from Berlin to East Germany and then back to West Germany. So the Berlin SCA people always had a tough time being involved in the principality, just because they were so isolated and it was so hard for them. I believe he was a civilian, and he was from Atenveld. So we fought in that tourney, and it was him and I in the finals. And you know, big guy, big guy, like 6'6", and just a big guy. And he beat me. He was a knight. He beat me legitimately, fine, no problem. I had no problem with him in that tournament. I had absolutely no problem in that tournament. It was good, clean fighting. I didn't feel like I had hit him in a way that he would have been able to acknowledge a shot. So everything in my mind was okay. And then he stepped up and became prince. And that next tournament, the fall tournament, I'm fighting in, it was up in Sweden. So we were all trucked ourselves up to Sweden, which was, you know, you left the night before, you were on ferries. And off we went to Sweden. And it started out fine. There was another knight there, also from Atenveld at that point. Rame could not be at that event. He was the marshal of the principality. His squire Garth was there, who was an unbelt, and he was the marshal in charge. So we're going through the tournament, and a couple times when I was fighting another fighter, something would happen and the prince would call hold. And a number of times he would come up to me and say, you know, you can't do that. You circled your opponent or something. And I'm like, I don't think I did. And I'd look to the marshal and did I do, you know, did I circle? Did I do something that was, and he'd be like, I don't know. And so I kept getting these warnings, and I thought, well, this is bizarre. But I just try to fight really cleanly and really make sure I wasn't doing anything to cheat or be, you know, against the rules of the list. And then it was me and this knight in the finals. And he took the first one, I took the second one. We're fighting our third bout. And I legged him. I think he legged me. And I was making contact with him. I mean, solid contact. I'm like, God, he's not taking any of this stuff. And I was thinking, this is a little odd. And finally, at one point, he called a hold. And he got up and walked off the field. And the prince followed him, and the marshal did not. So I'm sitting on the field going, okay, what's happening? And I look to the marshal, and he's like, I don't know. I'm thinking, well, this is odd. And after a few minutes, the prince comes up to me and says, you're not taking his shots. He can't hit you any harder. You're cheating, basically. And I'm like, okay, he hasn't hit me. I mean, some stuff has come in, but there's been nothing good. There's been nothing clean on me. And I can't hit him hard enough. No, that's not what's wrong. And off the prince went. At this point, I'm like, okay, something's really not right here. This is not okay. And I asked the marshal, again, unbelt, I said, do you know what's going on? No, I don't know what's going on. And I said, is there any way you can find out what's going on? He went over there, but he didn't stick around. I think they shoot him off. And the prince came up to me again and said, I will not allow him to step out of this fight. You have not been taking his shots. And off he went. Well, at that point, I'm like, okay, this is not right. This is not happening. I mean, 10, 15 minutes has gone by. It's quite a long time. So I called my consort over and I said, Stefan, I'm pretty worried here that this isn't going to happen. And what I'm afraid of is I'm afraid for the principality. I said, I really think if I push this, it's not going to bode well for the principality. And bless his heart, he's like, whatever you need to do, just do what you need to do. And I'd heard once before this tournament, something about the prince not really liking women, but I never put two and two together. And then I realized he's not going to let me win this over hell and high water. He's just not going to let me. So I called Marshall over and I said, I'm going to walk on this. I'm going to walk and not push this. So he went to the prince. Prince came over and basically said, you're done. I'm done. So off they went, and the night was made air. And I was in my head bad. I'm like, what did I do wrong, first of all? And I think that's typical of women in general. What did I do wrong? Did I blow shots? So I'm literally in my head going, did I not take something? I'm replaying every fight. By this time, everyone else has gone off to the site, and my knight wasn't there. There were no other knights there but these two guys. And I'm like, I really don't think I did anything wrong. I don't think I blew any shots. I didn't wear heavy armor. I'm like, there's nothing hit me. So I head back to the hall and somehow got through the rest of the night. And then going home, we were all on the ferry going home. And I was still thinking, I was in my head a lot. I'm still thinking, I really don't think I did anything wrong here. I think this was effed up. And I passed the guy who was in the finals with me in the hallway. He had just come from the showers or sauna or something. And he was like, oh man, you killed me. You just beat me up. I can hardly move my arm. I just can't believe you really pulverized me. And I almost walked. I went by him in the hall and then I stopped. And I'm like, I can't let this go. And so I said, really? What exactly are you saying? He says, well, you got me. I mean, you were beating the crap out of me. I said, that's interesting because I was told that I hadn't hit you. And he's like, what? I said, yeah, the prince came to me and said, I was blowing your shots. He said, no, I told him. I said, I'm not taking your shot. She's killed me 3 times, however many. And I blew the shots. I blew her off. I need to step away from this. I told him that I hadn't taken your shots. And I said, really? Because that's not what he told me. And that's why I stepped down, because I realized he wasn't going to let me win. And in all fairness, the guy was shocked. The knight was shocked. He was like, that's not right. And so at that point, I said, okay, I can't let this go. And I fought it. I went to the other knights that were in the principality that hadn't been at the site, and I explained my side of the story. They evidently talked to my opponent and got his side of the story. And to the best of my understanding, the intent was to have a court of chivalry called. And at that point, there were 4 other knights in the kingdom. Maybe 4 that I know of. I can't remember when Axel showed up. And they held a court of chivalry. And they sent it back to the east. And for whatever reason, it was deemed too late from the time of the problem to have been upheld. The next thing I know, the King of the East is on the phone with me saying, what happened? And I explained. And then we're refighting the tournament. So the fall tournament was refought on the day of investiture. that the investiture should have happened. It was an interesting list because there were more people in it than had fought in the original list, including Sir Rame. And when I got back from that tournament, and kind of the first fighter practice I went after that, I melted down. I mean, I had my mental, I'll never fight again, blah, 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 blah. And luckily my friends, it was a really good fighter practice, and my knight was like, excuse us, no, that's not the case. You're gonna fight again. And this is just one stupid person being stupid. And I was able to fight that weekend and exercise a lot of demons. And so when I found out they were refighting the tournament, I was like, you know, I don't need to refight this. I don't need to do this for me. I've exercised my demons. I know where I stood. I know what happened that day. At that time, no women had won any ranking fight. There was one woman out in the West, Viscountess Maven, Sir Maven, who had fought in a principality out there that was a weird, they had done a weird thing where you had to enter 5 different things. It was an A&S and a couple other things. And so it was a multi-fold tourney, and they did have fighting as well, but she had won not solely by tourney. And so no woman had won solely by right of arms. I knew I could do it. I already had. And so I said, you know, this is my last year. I'm leaving in the fall. My contract runs out. I really don't need to do this, but I realized I need to do this. I need to be the woman to say females are here to fight. Females aren't going away. And I don't give a rat's ass what you guys think of it. We're here and we're capable and we're not going away. And so I fought and I won the day. And then it got weirder. My consort and I sat in a room waiting and not knowing what was going on for hours, while evidently the king and the prince and the chivalry were talking about what went on. And evidently the prince was not going to make me princess. And so half an hour before a deadline of, if this doesn't happen, it will cease, the principality will cease to exist. We were told it's going to happen. The prince abdicated, his princess abdicated, and the king of the East made me princess of Drakenfall by my own hand. And then my consort. And there we were.
Wow.
Standing on the throne. So it was intense. It was rough, but it all came out right in the end.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story on a lot of levels. I think, I mean, I have to admit, like, I've always, like, from afar been a fan of yours, because you proved, you know, to little, you know, 25-year-old me when I started that it could be done. And that's a huge thing. I mean, representation matters, right?
It does. And I never had that. I mean, I knew about Maven, I knew about Sir Trudy, I knew there were women out west and in parts of the world that had done that, but they were so far away. I was in this little bubble all by myself. And, you know, it mattered, and I knew it mattered. I knew it mattered, and I'm proud of the fact that I can say I'm the first female to have won solely by right of arms. I give Maven a lot of credit, because she did win that day, and she was definitely princess by her own hand. There was just that little clause that it wasn't solely a tournament.
But for you to win twice, and then still have some weird thing at the end where, you know, you couldn't just enjoy that you had worked hard and it had paid off, just super sucks. Like, yeah. I never knew that happened until you told me a few months ago. And I just think it's really important that people know that we've come a long way, and there's people like you that have paved the way and that have dealt with some super shitty stuff to pave the way. So yeah, Duke Christopher saying that Mathan did win the fighting portion of her tournament as well.
Yeah.
Which is what I had heard from Mathan too. Both of you, I mean, just awesome trailblazers.
I don't think she gets enough credit.
No, I don't. Yeah.
You know, because it was a weird tournament and it was this multi-layer thing, and I guess not too many people entered for a Western Principality tournament. She kind of got a crap deal on that one. And I did meet her, and I knew her out west, and she was a great lady, shorter than me, which is not many of
I met her at an Ontario West War, and man, she is short, but she was still in armor at like 72.
Yeah, scrappy lady, scrappy lady. And, you know, it was hearing about what she had done. And again, Sir Trudy, Sir Fern, who I met the next Penzic after that, after I'd won the coronet, after she was knighted. But there were so few then. There were so few, which is why I knew it mattered that I refight that list, for all I didn't want to at that point. We had fun, you know, we had a good reign, we had fun. That was interesting times.
Was the populace supportive?
Very.
Yeah, that's great.
Very. As a matter of fact, a piece of the story, we were in Sweden, and the Nordmark loved me. They were an amazing bunch of people anyway. And so that day when the tournament that I didn't win happened, I was very, very late going back to the hall on purpose. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want anyone to see me. And we were in this, it was a church or a school where there was a gymnasium downstairs, and then upstairs was where the feast hall and everything else was happening. And so by the time I came back, they were having court upstairs, which I kind of made sure that that would be happening. So I figured, great, I'll go downstairs, I'll change, I'll be down in the gym by myself, no one will be there. I go down, the entire barony of Nordmark is down there. And I'm like, when I go down, they start applauding me. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And why aren't you upstairs? We're boycotting court. I'm like, you can't do that. It's your own group. They were a barony. You can't boycott. Yes, we can. We're boycotting court. So I'm like, oh my God, you people, they were amazing. They were just incredibly supportive. And then, you know, the day we refought the tourney, other than the prince, I had a lot of support, and there were people that really did want to see it happen. So yeah.
I always think it's interesting when a tourney has to be refought for something like that, that it isn't restricted to the same people that was in the tourney before, or that, you know, if you're acknowledging that something kinky happened, that why isn't the correct result just the result? But you did it. I mean, you won twice. And you know, the second time you even had a more heavily contested tournament, right?
Yeah.
And definitely. You didn't fight the same guy in the final in the second one, did you?
No, I fought Sir Raym in the final, and the guy was there that I fought, and I don't know whether his demons caught up with him, but he barely made it 2 rounds. I mean, he was just not, his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't in it. It was actually sad. It was kind of sad, because I wouldn't have minded having that finals to refight.
What that prince did was such a disservice to both of you as fighters.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, the level of gaslighting, thank you for sticking with it. Thank you for doing it anyway. I don't have words.
It was interesting. And, you know, a piece of that happened afterwards, you know, again, coming from the East, where even if they didn't know what to do with me, they were never anti-female fighter. From Drachenwald, I ended up in Callantyre. So for this northeastern part of the America girl to be in the Midwest was a bit of a eye-opener anyway. Very, very different way of thinking out there, you know, and I'm from New England, for God's sakes, what do I know? And they definitely treated their women fighters a lot differently than the East had. They ended up hating me at the time. It was rather interesting because I just went there as, you know, thinking, okay, you know, I'm on the path. I've done this thing. It's cool, but it's not what I want to be. It's not chivalry, which is the path I was on at that point, very definitely. And so I thought, great, you know, I'll have new fighters to fight. I'll have, you know, more to do. They were very patronizing of the women fighters they had in practice. Oh, great job. You're doing good. Women were throwing shots that weren't good. And they'd just, yeah, pat them on the head. Yeah, you're doing great. And, you know, I'd come up and I'd fight them and I'd give them a fight. And they did not like it. They did not like it one bit. And luckily there was another guy out there who actually was Rame Squire, who Callantyr was having an issue with because he was too ferocious. And my knight took him aside as a favor to Rame and Rourke, who ended up becoming Count and Sir. And so Rourke was this big bad guy in Callantyr's eyes at the time. They were all afraid of him. And him and I got along great. And so we'd fight. I mean, he was, again, big, 6'6", big guy. And we'd just go at it and have a ball and scare Callantyr to death. So I actually had the nickname out there. He told me I was Viscountess Doom.
It's Doom.
That's what Callantyr called me. Yep. And they were very deeply offended that I could actually fight them as an equal, because they didn't really let their women fighters do that.
Well, I think that's an interesting point because even now, I think that there is a sort of a duality sometimes where when a woman is fighting and she's maybe not all that good, but you know, there's a lot of hope and a lot of patting on the head. But when you're really good and you can actually beat people, you get a lot of shrugging of blows, or it's just a weird thing. Like it's kind of a weird, because like same fighters, different calibration for like people that are really a threat and people that aren't. And I think it's very minimal. I think that it's a small percentage of people, but I think it is a real phenomenon that we don't talk about a lot. And it's sort of a covert kind of leftover misogyny. And I'm glad that you brought it up because it's something I've noticed. And I think it still lingers. Yeah.
It also, you know, there's also another problem, and this is something that when I was out west, and now they were a welcoming kingdom. I mean, they welcomed me and woohooed me and were thrilled to death and ended up giving me the accolade. But one of the things that I noticed out there that was pretty different and is different than a lot of places I've been is the level of practice at a fighter practice. If you were fighting the group of fighters that you were going to see in crown tourney, so the more elite unbelts and the fighters that were really going up at that level, you fought crown tourney level fights at practice. If you wanted to work on something, you'd say, not today, I'm working on this, can you work with me on this? Or someone would come to me and say, hey Gwen, I really need to get better at fighting a lefty, let's work together. When you didn't have something specific to work on, if I'd go out there, and you know, the people that were the unbelts that were going into crown tourney, they knew when I'd say let's fight, we were fighting crown tourney fights. And I think that's something that is lacking at a lot of practices. You have a couple things that happen in practices. Obviously, you've got new people that you can't do that to. You've got to teach them, you've got to bring them up. a lot of times in practice, you have the king of practice, the one or two guys that's all they want to do is be the best. And it can get brutal. I mean, it can be ugly fights. They'll just beat you until you walk off the practice. But even when I'd go up and fight somebody in some of the other kingdoms I've been in that I knew were my competitors in a crown tourney level, I wouldn't get the same fight out of them. And they'd even say, I don't fight that way in practice. I'm like, why not? Because what you're doing and what I've heard people say to their students is they'd get to crown tourney and they'd fight the same people at practice and they'd blow them out of the water. Well, I fight differently at crown than I do at practice. Well, then what are you teaching your student? At some point, when is it okay to tell somebody, if you're going to start entering a crown tourney, it's a whole different level of fight? Why is it this big mystery? And that always surprised me when I'd be in other kingdoms and other places and be fighting, and I'd be like, well, why aren't we fighting at the level of crown tourney if that's indeed what two people want to do? Why do you fight differently at crown tourney than you do at practice? And I think that is a piece of it too. Not only fighting women differently, but also there are a lot of places where you're not training at the same level. And to me, that's a mystery.
Yeah. I think that has changed in a lot of ways with just better communication, because I think there are different ways to use practice, right? Like, and you do want to train at practice. You want to work on the things that you want to work for tourney, but there's also a portion of practice that should be about giving each other your crown tourney fights and teaching each other how to beat each other so that you all rise, right? Like, you know, we don't have these, like, we shouldn't have these secret shots that we don't tell anyone about. I mean, anyway.
Well, and it's also the mental piece. You know, if I'm going to go into crown tourney and have to turn off the brain, you know, to fight my best fight, I have to not think about my best fight. If I go to every practice and all I'm doing is thinking about everything, when am I training the mental game?
Right.
That doesn't work for me. Now, everyone's different. I get that. But there were times at practice when I'd be like, turn it off. I need to just fight, and I need to fight hard. I need to fight that level of fight so that I can make sure I can turn off the brain. You know, it's one of the things I teach and I talk about with my students at a certain point, when you kind of broken into that mid-level fighter, but you want to start rising in the middle level of the bell curve is huge. There's a lot of people there and they're all milling around in the swamp. In order to start moving up through that and getting a leg up, you have to learn that mental piece. And the way I describe it to them is, you know, okay, you're in New York City and you're in the taxi cab. So you're in the back seat, but you want to pay attention to where the taxi guide's taking you so he's not running the fare up, but you can't be driving from the back seat. You can't be saying, oh, you missed your turn. Oh, look out for that pedestrian, or you're going to interfere with his ability to drive. So you've got to be aware of the direction the fight is going in without being the backseat driver. And that's the mental piece. That's where I put myself in a fight. I have to be aware of what's going on around me and what my opponent is doing, but I can't be thinking about, oh, well, he just did that, so I can do that, because it's too late. And it's that ability that if we're not training that and we're not working with that and we're not getting people to be able to figure out how to process the fight in that way, we're not doing them service. At least I feel that way. With
no, I agree. I agree. So how long were you in the West before you were offered offered admittance into the Order of Chivalry?
So let's see, I got to the West in 90 and I got the accolade in 92, so 2 years. It would have been like 2.5. Because I left Drachenwald in the fall of '88. I was in Callantyre for a year. We left Callantyre, and my knight Artos, we ended up being a couple, and then we ended up getting married. I would never I would have done it only in that order. I would never have had a relationship and then become knighted to somebody I had a relationship with. That would have been a failure, but it worked out the other way, so it was okay. And so that's why we ended up out west, was because that was where he was from, and he was in the military at the time. So I was there 2.5 years essentially. We got there in like the January of 90, and it was the fall of 92. So.
And when you were in the West, were you fighting crowns and stuff like that? Was it a different experience for you than
Yeah.
before?
Yeah. So at the time, the two landed principalities, Principality of the Mist, which is the Bay Area, Principality of Sinagua, which is out Central Valley area. And then they had other principalities, but they're outside of the main kingdom. And at the time, I really wasn't in a financial position to have won a coronet. And it was like, I really was like, I should try and win another coronet out here, but I have already done it. And I really couldn't financially. So I fought in the coronets, Principality of the Mist, but I really never applied myself 100% to them because I didn't want to win. And that was, looking back on that, I probably shouldn't have done that. At the time, it didn't matter for the path I was on, because when I fought in crown tourneys, and they were huge crown tourneys out there, there's 100+ people fighting in crown tourneys out there. That was when I clearly was rising through the ranks. So my best crown tourney showing, it was 118 man list. And I was in top 16. And it was right after that. That was the fall crown. It was right after that my name started getting really bantied about in the shift circles. That was a good day. That was a fun day.
And who offered you?
It was actually Rolf and Mari. Mari,
Okay.
Who is now Sir Mari,
Great.
was his queen.
Also Viscountess by right arms.
Also Viscountess later on by right of arms. Yeah. And I kind of
cool.
missed that chapter because I was who knows where at the time, but yeah. And well done on her. So she was up in Sinagua way. And Sinagua is a fun bunch. So when I was fighting out west, Duke Jade of Starfall and Duke Radnor were trading being king. Occasionally someone else would come up and get in there, but Jade was at the Miss fighter practice, Bart, under the train, the what am I saying? Whatever.
Yeah, the Bart, yeah.
Yeah, the public transport. There we go. And they had this fighter practice down under the trains there. And Jade was kind of king of that. And I went there a couple of times. I'm like, I said to my knight, I said, I can't learn here. This is a Jade fest. I mean, he's just out there doing his thing, which was no offense to him. I mean, he was winning crowns. He was that good. But I knew that was not a learning environment for me. So we started going up to Sinagua. Well, at that time up in Sinagua, there was this crowd of hot 20-something-year-old guys that were just on fire. And it was people like Thorstag and Havek and Aiden and a couple of those guys who have gone on, to be dukes. Well, they were all just hot, young punks and, fit as a fiddle and full of themselves, as they should be. And that's where I was able to capitalize on their energy and be able to rise above. I needed that kind of energy to make myself better. And because they were so hot and so eager, I'm not a fast fighter. I was never fast. They described me as a Jeep in first gear out there. That's pretty much me. But what I learned I could do with those guys is use their energy like a surfer on the top of the wave. And so they all knew they were faster than me. And in some ways,
I'm laughing because my brother-in-law always tells me to surf the wave, and I never feel like the surfer. But you are the surfer. So
I became the surfer, and they were faster than me. They were better than me in a lot of ways, but I could best them. And I learned how to best them and how to use that energy and that youth and exuberance to my advantage to get what I needed. And it changed everything. I mean, there's no question that by then, of course, I knew, I was confident in my abilities and I trusted my instincts. And I think that is a really hard piece for women fighters. Being women, we question ourselves. It's just the damn hormones. It's what we do. So I actually describe it this way. When you get a bunch of guys and you tell them that room needs to be painted, they grab a paint can, they paint the room. You get a bunch of women and say that room needs to be painted, and they're going to spend about 5 hours figuring out what color to paint it. That is the problem right there. The guys are just going to grab that can of red paint and slap it on the walls and go have beer. The girls, the ladies, are going to sit there. That's not the right shade. That's going to clash with it. I don't like that. We are going to go around and around and around. And this is what we do to ourselves. And so winning the Coronet in Drachenwald and refighting that tourney and coming out victorious in the Coronet in Drachenwald gave me the ability to say, I don't need to second guess myself. So when I got to Callantyre and all these people were like, who the hell do you think you are? I'm like, well, I'll show you who I am. And I'd lay stick on them, which offended the piss out of them, but there it was. I had the confidence to do that. So when I got out west, they were like, woo, who's this hot stick? Let's see what she can do. And I said, well, this is what I can do. And if it wasn't what if it came out not the way I wanted to, it'd be like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, I got to go work on that because I couldn't beat that Duke. Big surprise. But I had the confidence to think I could. And so at that point, I knew what I needed to get better. And I told my knight, I said, do not let my name come up in council without saying, I want to be held under the same microscope that everyone else is at. Because at that point, there were more and more women being knighted in other kingdoms. And the rumor mill was, well, they're knighting them because they need to knight a woman and they were good enough. And it's like, no, we need to be held under the same microscope. We need to be at the level of chivalry. And so I made sure he knew I wanted to be at their level of chivalry out west. And he did. But having the confidence to say, I need to train this way, I need this experience, I need to go here to get what I need, that was a huge piece. And that I think a lot of women don't trust their instincts on that.
And part of why they don't trust their instincts is because they continue to have microaggressions and gaslighting from people that they fight every day in their practice.
Yeah.
And, you know, I watch knights in my kingdom do these things, and they think of themselves as supporters of female fighters. And yet they do these little and sometimes big things that are really undermining. Anyway, I'm sorry, Rifkin. What?
No, I had two things I wanted to say there. One, I think it's amazing that you were self-aware enough to know what you needed and be able to say, hey, I know this is a very high level practice, but this isn't, I'm not going to get what I need here. And you went and found what you needed. Like, I think that's a hard thing to do, especially unbelted, to say, this isn't for me, this isn't going to work. And then second, I just kind of wanted to acknowledge the asterisk. Like, there always feels like there's an asterisk, like, you know, with Mason, like, you know, it's that the tournament wasn't completely fighting. And then with, you know, women getting knighted, oh, it's because we need to show that we'll knight a woman. And it's the asterisk that really bothers me, is that you can't ever get away from it, because people are always going to think that there's a reason beyond like the merit for whatever happened. And I think I think we're getting away from that now, but it's sort of important to acknowledge that there will always well, not hopefully not always, but up to this point, there feels like there's an asterisk. Like I'm trying to get Rowan, Beatrice von Comfer, to do an interview. She's the first woman that won crown by right of arms.
Yeah.
And there's an asterisk with her too. Oh, she fought her husband in the final.
I remember when that happened.
Yeah.
And I remember,
and you know what? There's not an asterisk. She won crown.
One crown. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, who the hell cares?
Right.
You know, if he inside him felt he could relax fighting her, shame on him.
Right.
You know, if there was something there. I agree with you. And I do think it is changing. One of the things, two things, we haven't reached the critical mass number yet, and that's part of the problem. So it's still like, should we, what is it? You know, there's still the hemming and hawing. The good news is, with a lot of newer kingdoms that have been made, I mean, in my day, it was 5 kingdoms, you know, and what are we up to now? 20 something? I don't even know. The newer kingdoms are made up of newer people where it is now accepted and it's more the norm. So I think we're starting to see a little bit more normalization of females in armor. You know, unfortunately, and this is something, being a student of sociology, you have to look at the underlying mundane world to understand how the SCA works. You know, the people in Boston are the way they are, and thus, if they're in the SCA, they're the way they are. The people in the Palantir in the Midwest are the way they are because of the political, mundane socioeconomics of it all. You go to a place that's got a lot of rednecks, you're going to find a lot of rednecks in the SCA. I pulled up outside a little strip mall to run into some store to do something, and there's this younger guy. He was probably in his late 20s, early 30s, with apparently his mother in the car, so he's probably taking her shopping. I drive a huge F-250 pickup truck. I get out of the truck and I'm walking up to the store and he's staring at me, and I'm like, okay. And he says to me, I really expected a big burly redneck to get out of that truck. And I looked at him and I laughed and I said, what makes you think I'm not a big burly redneck? And he found the joke in that. But it's mundanely in there, and so it's in the SCA.
Right. That's the thing that I'm always sort of trying to point out, is that yes, we like to idealize who we are in the society, and we are better than a microcosm of regular society, because I think we are more focused on being chivalric and honorable and treating each other with generosity. But we have that thread that runs through larger society, because we are people of the larger society in a smaller part. My point, I think I want to make, is that even though women fighters are more normalized now, I don't think successful women fighters are. I was talking to Duke Sean and Duke Christopher today, and we were talking about how many Dukes there are in the society, because I have this whole quest where I'm interviewing Dukes, and Sean thinks there's 300, and I heard that, and I'm like, wow, there's 6 times more Dukes than there are female Shiv.
Yep.
Right? And there's no female Shiv that have won 2 crowns. None. I mean, there's 2 of us that have won 1 crown.
Right.
So there's still this big disparity, right? And I think, you know, with the number of women who are fighting really well now and getting knighted and working really hard, I think we'll see that change. And especially with having 20 different kingdoms now, and you have, you know, 40 to, I don't know, the West has 3 crowns, so 46 crowns a year or whatever. We'll see that change, but that's a very, very striking disparity.
And you know, some of that, you've got to look at the sport, and this is true across all athletic endeavors. Certain sports are just biased to bigger and stronger, and that doesn't mean that women can't do it, but it means that you're not going to see the level of achievement as much with women because it's just biased that way. You know, when you see, most people are too young to remember the Olympics back in the 80s and stuff, when the Soviet Union, the women's track team, I mean, oh my God, they were so steroid up and they were unbeatable at that point. But is that the levels we want to go to?
No.
And, you know, and I think that's twofold. I think the sport is biased against someone who's not big and strong. That doesn't mean male or female, just someone who's not big and strong. There's a lot of endurance. There's a lot of, you have to have that gifted natural ability. And that's not to say women don't have that, but it's not a natural thing for a woman to do, to put on armor, pick up a sword and wail on people. On the other side of that, there's a level of not commitment. That's not the word I'm thinking of. I'm gonna say
Dedication.
No, I'm gonna say ferocity, but that's not quite right. This is something that I had to deal with because professionally, mundanely, I was a physical therapist. There's a level of my fight I never went because I could not be that vicious. There's a level that you have to go and you have to be pretty vicious and pretty hardcore to get to that crown level. And I don't mean the word vicious nastily, but there's a level of beating your opponent that I think is very challenging for females, physiological females, to do. Doesn't say it can't be done.
Duke Sean says it's brutality.
I was gonna say
that's, yeah, it is. And I know I consciously made a decision that I couldn't go there because I couldn't. Being a physical therapist, there's a certain level of pain that goes with my profession, but I have to be very, very empathic to my patients and not let that be something that comes between us. In SCA fighting, you can't have that empathy and compassion. There's a level of brutality that you have to go. I've gone there a couple of times. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I think I'm a really empathic person too. And I think the way that I can allow myself to get there is that I really believe in my heart that our armor protects us and that I'm not actually trying to hurt my opponent. And if I can, you know, flick that in my head, and that I know I'm trying to best my opponent, but I'm not trying to hurt them.
Yep.
I feel like we can get there. But
I agree. We can get there, but it's that mental game. So for me, it was being able to turn off the thought process to become a better fighter. For someone else, it's the ability to turn off the empathy. And I mean, I think these are generalizations, and that's always the dangerous thing to do.
Right.
Knowing as much as I know after this many years in armor, having met a lot of women in armor, I think in our society and the way women are raised, females or women are raised, I mean, we see it now with the transgender world, that younger and younger people are saying, I'm not in the right body.
Right.
And what they have to go through to get that acknowledgement from other people around them. I think it's the same idea for a female person to get to that level of brutality, to consistently play that game. It's kind of hardcore, and it's going against everything they've been raised and brought up to do, just because of our society.
Yeah, I don't want to, I can't speak intelligently to transgender issues, but I can speak intelligently to how about feeling not culturally female, but still being a woman. And I think that the more we can embrace that society and culture doesn't dictate to us what it means to be a woman, the better off we are.
Yeah.
Because there's just so many different shapes, sizes, flavors of what it means to be a woman. You don't have to be a model. You don't have to wear heels. I mean, like that doesn't, define any of us. I don't know what my point is, but I guess my point is that, let's not let culture or society define what it means to be a woman. And if being a woman to you means like kicking ass on the field and like owning your shit,
Then
100% behind you. Right, 100%.
Absolutely. And we're getting there, we're getting there mundanely. We're getting there as a society. The society is having some serious growing pains right now because we're actually having attrition for a lot of different reasons. I don't know if any of you looked at the poll that went out and the numbers of ethnic and, male-female ratios. They're kind of appalling. Can we move beyond this? I think we can. I think the society, just like anything, it grows, it changes. 50 years is a long ass time for a bunch of hippies to be having fun. And, we're all fringies. We're all fringe people who are drawn to this crazy game. And so it's bursting at the seams and it's going to reinvent itself. But I think reinvention, and this is something that I like to try and tell women fighters, reinventing female in armor is what we do every time we get in armor. Don't tell men how to think about female fighters. Show them how to think about female fighters. And it is hard for females and women to be self-confident in their abilities, especially when they are being questioned oftentimes. But being able to trust a little bit that this is who I am, this is who I want to be, and if I consistently go out there and go for what I want, I will achieve it. You have to be true to yourself, though. You really have to be true to yourself. That's not easy.
Well, I want to thank you for having this conversation with us, because I think it's a really hard thing for people to talk about, and a lot of people don't talk about it because it's so charged. And so many people, oh, you don't speak for me, whatever. We're not speaking for anybody but our own selves. But I really appreciate having the conversation.
Well, one of the things I found when I went to different kingdoms also, and this is something that I would beseech and encourage other female fighters to think of. Because I was who I was the cherry on top at the time. I would be, female fighters would be told, oh, you've got to meet her, and oh, we've got to get you to fight her. And so by the time they would meet me, they were so turned off the idea. They were so anti-fighting another female. And I think female fighters, what we can really do to help ourselves is to seek each other out much, much more. Don't be turned off by what you hear. Don't be afraid by what you hear. Don't be intimidated by someone who's been fighting for 40 years. Seek out the other females who are in armor. We all have experiences. We all have things we can share. Are we all going to be good at what we do? Of course not. But you learn from all of those things. And, I think that's so important rather than shying away. And I know one of the hardest things, and again, this seems to be more of a physiological female reaction than a male reaction, is, I'm going to put it this way. Have you ever met somebody that you instantly dislike?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, we all do. One of the things I learned a long, long time ago is what we usually dislike is because they have a trait in themselves that we recognize that is a trait in ourselves that we hate about ourselves. a lot of female fighters that I have met have a chip on their shoulder about me. Get over it. Don't have a chip on your shoulder about someone who's got there and achieved what you want. That's the wrong reaction. Be inspired by the fact that someone got there ahead of you and the path is paved and is opening those doors, versus the instant, I can't like them because they accomplished something that I can't. And I think that's so hard for females.
I think
Again, that's generalization, which we shouldn't do.
yeah. No, but no, I think the culture has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years, because it used to, like, I 100% get what you're saying about, you got to meet her, you got to meet her, you got to fight her. And it felt like a measuring stick, right?
Mhm.
And if you didn't measure up, you weren't going to be a good fighter because you didn't, yeah, or whatever. I mean, I don't even know. Like, you're not the best female fighter they know anymore or whatever. But I really believe that with social media and with some of the groups on Facebook that put people of the same identifying gender together, that we've sort of gotten hopefully past that a lot, and that we are using each other as encouragement and motivation. I have to tell you, I 100% want to meet like Sir Ava and some of these other people and fight them, because I just want to learn from them. Like, she's got to be better at things than I am, and she and it won't be a measuring stick, it won't be like, oh, who's the better one. It's
I'm
more about having fun with her, because we both love the same thing.
I'm so sad. I'm so sad that I'm so past my prime that I can't stand toe to toe with you and people at your level now.
Well,
It's
you
like,
don't think
crap, I'm an old
you
fart.
fight me and you'll kick my ass.
I don't think I'm kicking anyone's ass these days, but it's okay.
Shaxi, you said something I totally didn't hear.
I was just going to say that I think it's so important that women, fighting or non-fighting women, lift each other up.
Yeah.
And continue
100%.
to approach each other in support rather in competition and in jealousy and denigration. I think it's one of the most unhealthy things that women do. And we're already, all of us individually and as a group, are already fighting battles, and we don't need to be fighting each other. We need to be enabling each other and lifting each other up. It's really
100%.
That's exactly the right way to say it. You said it so much better than I was trying to spit it out, but that's exactly right. And I think jealousy is part of it. I think fear is a huge part of it. And I think just being, so afraid that you're going to lose something from that, and never feel you're going to lose. What's the worst thing that can happen? You go up to say to someone, oh, I'd love to talk to you, and they say no.
Right.
Okay, that's their problem at that point. It's interesting because on one of the Shiv after talks that we had for the lady roundtable, a couple of the ladies were saying, I don't want to be an inspiration. I don't want to do that. And I'm like, that's not your call.
Right.
That's not your call, and don't go there, because if I'm inspired by you, it's you're giving me a gift. Care less whether you want me to be inspired by you or not. And I thought that attitude of I don't want to be someone's inspiration, that's wrong. That never say that, because so many things can inspire someone, and you may never know it.
It's hard because women in the fighting community are such a minority. Anybody who does have, meet with success through their very hard work becomes sort of an icon, and there's so much pressure, and there's so much, it's like you get lifted up on this pedestal, and the fear of falling off of that. I totally understand someone saying they don't want to be the inspiration, they don't want to be the model knight, because they're just a person, right? And nobody's going to live up to that kind of adulation.
I was going to say, I think I might have been one of those people that says I don't want to be an inspiration, but it's not that I don't recognize that the path and what I've accomplished, even though I'm not satisfied with my accomplishments, isn't inspiring. It's that's not my motivation. And I think the fear is not just failure, but it's of success. I think we fear our own success because we're stupid, overthinking human beings.
How people are going to look at us. No, it's how people.
How people are going to look at us, or that, yeah.
Well, look what happened to me in Callantyre.
Right.
Because I was successful, and I held myself as a successful fighter, that they couldn't deal with it. So we're afraid that success will make it harder in some ways. But what I say to someone who's afraid of being an inspiration, don't own that, because it doesn't matter what piece of you is being inspirational. If something you're doing is helping someone else on a tough journey, that's the end of the sentence. That's all that matters. And it doesn't have to be your motivation. When I chose to refight the coronet tourney in Drachenwald, I chose to do it as a statement. That was a decision I made. If I had not chosen that, obviously my path would have changed dramatically. It was my choice at that point. So I agree with you. Your motivation shouldn't be that you're inspiring people. Your motivation should be you want to go become a duchess by her own hand. That's an awesome motivation. It's inspirational. And it's okay that it's inspirational.
Right. I think the point really is that you have no control over how people view you, or you know, or how they hold you, and that you shouldn't waste your energy caring about that one way or the other.
Stop thinking about the fight.
Yeah, it's about your fight, and it's about your journey, and yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
I feel like we're shortchanging all the other dimensions of you, though. But I'm super enjoying this conversation. But you're also an amazing equestrian, and you're a pelican, and we haven't talked about any of that.
Well, I grew up riding horses. I was in the horse world forever, and it's actually kind of interesting. And I won't make this very long. I had always known there was an equestrian world in the SCA, but it's like, you know, I did that when I was a kid. It's gymkhana type level stuff. I wanted to be a knight, you know, a chivalry. It's a little different. And so I stayed away from it. Well, then the person who I was married to, Artos, he was getting into horses, a very much of an amateur beginner horse person. And we found him a lovely horse. And as he got better at riding, he was like, well, what about these SCA equestrian games? And I'm like, absolutely. I was in 4-H when I was 7, 8, 9, 10. It's the same thing for people in the equestrian games now. And so I'm like, absolutely, it will make you a better horse person. So I started taking him, because I wasn't fighting. My knees were failing. I could barely walk across the field. And so I helped him and got involved in the community that way, and helped him with his horse. And then his horse got old. And so I let him ride my horse, which was way more horse than he should have done. And in order to do that, I had to train my horse what this was about. He was just a trail horse. He'd never been to an SCA thing. So the very first event, by then the SCA community wanted me to be a marshal. And they're like, well, can't you just compete once so we can authorize you, and then you'll be a marshal? I'm like, yeah, I'll do that, fine. So we set it up, we go to this event, and I have to introduce my horse, Jubal, to all these obstacles and crazy things that he's never seen. He's like, whoa, my God, what's all this? And we get through that. And so I compete. My purpose of competing is to get the horse introduced to all this and to get authorized so I can be a marshal. Well, I came in third and became Queen's champion of horse. I'm like, what the hell? That's not supposed to happen. I don't need an office. And then since then, the divorce happened, and I was taking Jubal to events because someone else could ride him. And then I went to another event and became King's champion of horse. It's like, well, this is fun. It's a hoot. It's something I can do. I always said when I couldn't fight anymore, I'd take up combat archery or something. It turned out I took up equestrian at this point, but I'm not done fighting yet. I might be down the road soon. I'm 62. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I actually went to a little training session. I was very cautious because of the COVID, and it was a small group of household fighters, of which a lot are women. And they invited me down and we were all in mass. And I actually did put on armor and just fought a couple fights. And I realized I'm so damn rusty because I'm coming off a 6.5-year layoff and I've only fought like every few months for the last 2 years. I'm fighting with the same armor and the same tiny shield that I was fighting when I was at my peak. So I decided for the winter months, I'm going to make myself a little bit more protective armor and change my shield. So in the spring, when we can fight again, I'm going to do the old fighter trick of not trying to be the young gung-ho person who runs all over, because I just can't. And I'll see if I can reinvent myself. The problem is the way I fight is so it's so assertive. It's such an attack form because I don't do defense. Once I learned how to be offensive, I gave up defense completely, and my whole fight is an offensive fight. It's really hard to change back. And I realized at the last practice, as I got my legs pulverized, I'm like, I really can't. I either have to get out of armor or I've got to reinvent myself again. So
Got to go back to the beginning.
That
shield.
even when you're 62, sometimes you have to go back to the beginning. It's true.
Yeah. Well, I am rooting for you 100%. I hope that you find the right balance between armor and shield and learning how to be more defensive and getting back on the field and really loving it and enjoying yourself.
I do love it. I just, when I, it was hard. The first time I put on armor, I became 60 years old and I said to myself, I got out of armor because I had to, not because I wanted to. And I had to see if I was done. Boy, I tell you, those first few practices were brutal for my ego. I mean, brutal, because I could not fight. And people who never had seen me fight were like, what the hell's that? But then one day I was fighting and it clicked and I had fun. And I'm like, okay, it's still fun. I don't care what people think. Once again, I threw that out the window. I'm just going to have fun until I can't do it. So yeah, it's worth it. And it's that whole know what you want, know what you need to be in your happy place and do it. Don't let anything stop you. If I need to go back to the basics and get a slightly bigger shield and put a little more armor on to keep me on the field, well, why wouldn't I do it?
Right. Well, everybody does when they take a break and they come back. I mean, you have to do that or it's going to be super painful. So,
yeah, it was.
You gotta check your ego, and it's more fun when you check your ego.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So for anyone who's thinking this is hard and I want to get better, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's fighting or equestrian or fencing, or you just find what drives you and figure out how to use that, because that's the only way to make it work. And it's the only way you're going to succeed at anything, especially for females in this very male dominant sport. Not easy, but if you're true to yourself, you can do it. Absolutely can do it.
100%. Well, we've been going like an hour 40, so I feel like we skipped a lot, but it's been a fantastic conversation. I so appreciate you being so open and candid and frank. So
it's me, but I love what you are doing, and I love that your calendar just keeps getting added to, because these are important conversations for so many levels. Just the history of the SCA, and people have been through tough times, and people coming up need to know it's not always as easy as it looks on the surface.
Right.
Yeah.
And that when they encounter difficulties, they aren't alone. And that I've been on the verge of tears for like the past hour and 15 minutes.
Like the whole interview.
Yeah, like the whole interview. Because I mean, I've had a really up close and personal view of my sister's journey to knighthood and as a knight for the last 17 years. And it's been hard. And it's been, where she is now has been fought for tooth and nail. And she's had a lot of support from a lot of different places, but she's had a lot of not support too.
Yep.
And I just, for both of you, I want to say trailblazer, but I mean, you really have forged a path for those who were going to follow in your footsteps. And I know that you don't want to be thought of as a hero, or, you know, I can tell I'm making my sister really uncomfortable.
My shoulders are going up to my ears.
Because I'm ugly crying now. But what you both have done is really something special, and you are appreciated and you are seen for doing what you've done, and thank you.
Well, thank you. And it, you know, it is really special. And there are what, 58 of us female Shiv, and each and every one of them worked their asses off to get there. And it was and is special, and it will always be special. And that's okay. You know, that's okay. That can be the magic of it if that's what we have to do. But the fact that we can all stand and shake each other's hands and call ourselves sisters and know that we'll have more joining us, it makes it all worthwhile. Absolutely. So I'm proud of every female that has continued to walk the path that I walked, because I was kind of alone when I did it. There were a few out in the horizon that had achieved it, and there weren't many behind me that I knew of. And so the more that I know are out there rattling the branches and the bushes, the happier I am. Absolutely.
And I just want to say, like, even people that have no desire to be knights, the if you choose to fight and be a, you know, a war person, and you know, knighthood's not your thing, 100% that is a hard path too, and it's a worthy path. Everybody has their own investment, and just because you decide that maybe peerage isn't your thing, doesn't discount what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, go have fun and you know, be the change that you want to see in the world, because that's, especially in this modern times that we're in right now, it's the only way we're going to survive it. So
well,
this was a hoot.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? I always ask that at the end, that we didn't cover.
I figured I'd just talk about wherever the direction went. I can talk for hours about lots of things.
Well, I could probably talk for hours about this too, but
it was a blast. It was a hoot. And I thank you so much for asking me and for doing what you're doing with the interviews. It's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah, we just really appreciate you and today, that this was great. It really was. Thank you everyone for joining us for this fantastic conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Next week, we are going to be talking to Duke Eric from Ontier, who lives in Lockhart now. I think I'm pronouncing that right now. He is kind of an icon in Ontier from early history, and it should be a very interesting interview. And then I am also talking to Duke Eliyahu and Duke Gunther, Sunday and Monday respectively.
And also on Tuesday, I am also interviewing someone from Lockhart, Yantu, who is a brewing laurel, and his brewing is on, he's been brewing for 30 years, and it's like next level crazy scale brewing. He's amazing.
Did he send you samples?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's legal.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time. And again, Your Excellency, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.